Now, this story's been making the rounds just a little bit, and I'm not going to spend a long time on it. So I want to get to a bunch of emails, and we're going to talk about Christmas parties here and things like that. But this is from Yahoo. Intel analyst tried to prevent the January 6th attack, but DHS failed to act. And there's so much of this that is just dripping with irony. One of the top things that I can think of is this, the DHS. You know why we have a DHS, Department of Homeland Security? We have a DHS because after 9/11, when something horrible like that happens, people start looking around and asking, why? How did this happen? How did we not know? How didn't we stop this? And one of the conclusions they came to was all the separate government agencies, FBI, CIA, all the others, they don't coordinate with each other. They don't talk with each other. Oftentimes they compete with each other for dollars and influence and publicity. And so they decided what we need is a Department of Homeland Security. And they decided we needed the Department of Homeland Security so we can make sure there aren't any more things slipping through the cracks. So whenever there's an action item, we can jump on it and jump in there. And this is an Intel analyst working for the DHS who spent 2 weeks sounding the alarm at the DHS that something potentially might happen at the Capitol, and they did nothing, which leads me to this. I believe the reason they did nothing is because they planned and coordinated most of what happened there anyway. And if you think I'm crazy, please go look up Ray Epps. And Ray Epps is just the most famous one. He's not nearly the only one. All these January 6th political prisoners we have now, some still rotting in jail without trial. By the way, this is a human rights violation. Human rights violation. Some of them still sitting in jail without any trial whatsoever. There are multiple people who've been caught on camera doing much worse than lots of the political prisoners have done, and they're not on the most wanted list, not arrested, not rotting in jail. And couple that with a couple things. One thing we know for a fact is maybe not every entrance, but many entrances, I know because I've seen the videotape myself, the Capitol Police opened the doors and stood aside and welcomed people in. I've talked to some of these people. They email into the show, these January 6th prisoners, and this is one of the most common things. They say, Jesse, they invited us in. We were walking in, and now we're criminals. That's one. Two, you've seen little snippets. If you only watch the news, you only see these little minor little snippets, and they always look really, really bad. And parts of it were really ugly. I'm not denying that. But they act like it's really, really bad. But what they don't show you is any context at all. By the way, my buddy Nick Searcy did a great movie on this. I think he called it January 6th. If you want to know what really happened, go watch that movie. But anyway, did you know a lot of those grenades that were going off, not non-lethal grenades, a lot of the non-lethal grenades that were going off, that the police started chucking those into the crowd before there was ever any real violence or anything like that in the crowd, almost as if they were trying to provoke a response. Huh. How about that? Don't worry, I'm sure it's nothing. Let's get to some emails. Dear Jesse, your whole Military Monday segment, that's Medal of Honor Monday, by the way, you stated the North invaded the South in 1863. That's not the whole truth regarding the Civil War. Historians regard the attack and annexation of Union Fort Sumter by the Confederacy in April 1861 to be the start of the Civil War. The Southern attack and annexation of Fort Sumter was one of many Southern attacks to follow on Union strongholds and targets. Union retaliation later was thus justified by the robust, I don't know how to say that word, casus belli? Chris, doesn't sound American. Anyway, initiated by the South. I do admit, however, that preserving the Union was a questionable policy by the abolitionists. His name is Ken. Well, all I said was the North invaded the South in 1863. That is a fact. The South did not invade the North. The North invaded the South. But your point is also correct, partially, that it began with the attack on Fort Sumter. Kind of. There's a little bit more complicated to this. There's a man named John Brown, fascinating individual, probably a deranged lunatic, but also somebody who really didn't like that we had slaves. And he was part of Bleeding Kansas. He's up there with swords, chopping people's heads off and things like that. And John Brown eventually goes down to, I think it was, I'm doing this off the top of my head. I think it was Harper's Ferry. I think it was Harper's Ferry. It was Harper's Ferry, wasn't it, Chris? And decided to try to spark a slave revolt down there. And it was just him and this ragtag group of losers because he was supposed to have this army that came with him, but no one showed up. Now, again, good cause, right? I want to free the slaves, but it was not well executed and not well thought out. And surprise, surprise, he ends up swinging from a rope and the whole thing was put down. Now, that is considered by many to be kind of the spark of the whole thing. Now, let's talk about Fort Sumter here for a moment. While you're correct, the South did attack. It's going to sound like I don't defend either side, really. I just think the whole conflict is fascinating. But while you're correct, they did attack Fort Sumter, and that kind of kicked everything off. Fort Sumter, in the Southern mind, was part of the South. It's in South Carolina, Charleston to be specific. I've been there. I've walked on Fort Sumter. A lot smaller than you think it is, by the way, but I've walked it. I've been there. And the South's eyes, wait a minute, we seceded. We had every right to secede from the Union. And remember, legally they did. The colonies would never have agreed to join the United States of America if they didn't think they could leave anytime they wanted. So yeah, slavery bad, secession perfectly legal. At least it should have been. But the South said, okay, we seceded. Why are you in our base? And the North said, no, this is our base. And the South said, no, we're in South Carolina. That's our base. You have so much time to get out. And if you're not out, we're going to blast you out of our base. That's what happened at Fort Sumter. Wherever you stand on that whole thing, and look, it doesn't really matter which way you look at it. If I decide this is my property and you're standing on my property, am I the aggressor if I remove you from my property? I don't know. I don't know about that.
Support the First TV today and get instant access to exclusive specials like Who is Ron DeSantis, the history of FBI scandals, and America's worst presidents. Visit thefirsttv.com/support or download the First TV app to become a supporter and start watching today.